welcome everybody who's able to join us. So great to see everybody's names and faces. We are going to have a great chat today. So if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. And I'm going to just do a few introductions and then we're going to get cracking straight into it. But this is a chat today and it is a conversation, so it's great to see your faces, and please participate as much as possible. My name is Ruth Knight. I'm from the Centre for Philanthropy and Non-Profit Studies at QUT. So I don't know if you've ever heard of QUT's centre before or been along to Tea and Buns, but I'll just give you a quick snapshot if you haven't. The centre is a teaching and also a research centre. We have wonderful courses for non-profit managers, and also we do a lot of just building the capability of the sector generally through our research and our teaching. And Tea and Buns was something that we started over a year ago now, 2 years ago nearly, and it was a conversation to get together with people in the sector, leaders in the sector, to talk about really topical issues. So the concept is that if you sign up for Tea and Bun once, you're always invited. You get the Zoom and you're welcome we hold it once a month on hopefully the last Thursday of the month, unless there's a real problem with that, but then I'd let you know. And each month we have a different speaker to come and help us talk about an issue. And we've had some amazing topics to discuss. And it's usually topics that you tell me that are either challenging you or things that you would like to learn, or it might be some research that we've been doing here at the centre and I want to share that with you and we discuss it. We've had all sorts of topics. So if you actually go to the Tea and Buns blog, you'll see a lot of the recordings from the previous months, and you can go and see if there's any that you missed that you would like to listen into, and of course share with your colleagues. So it's totally open, and of course I am recording today, but I'll put the recording up of this session when I can, hopefully later in the week or early next week. So welcome today. So that's what Tea and Buns is all about, and I'm hoping that you can all see my slides. Can you just put a thumbs up if you can see my slides? Yes? Okay, awesome. So let's see if I can actually click a okay. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting today. And at QUT in Brisbane, we're on the Turrbal and Yugara, I've got to say that correctly. They're the First Nations people of the lands of QUT, where we're based in Gardens Point. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. So I don't know where you're zooming in from today or where you know. I'm actually zooming in from the Gold Coast today, which is the Bundjalung country. So if you know your country, please put it in the chat. Would love to know the country that you are zooming in from today. Now, just to let you know about the discussion today, we're obviously all representing our own opinions and views, not particularly any organisation. It may not be, but of course, Volunteering Queensland has sent along or given us Michelle for the next hour. So she's going to be talking a lot about the types of things that Volunteering Queensland have been doing and learning, and what they sort of share with their volunteers coordinators. Now, please mute yourself if you're not talking, but if you want to talk, you're very, very welcome to. Just put your hand up or let me know in the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box to see what kind of questions come up, and I'll be throwing them at Michelle. But of course, you can just speak up if you like to, or just say, can I chat? So hopefully we're going to have a really good conversation, and of course respect at all times. So we're all coming, but any question is okay. All right, we're all friends today, and very, very welcome for you to share any question that you would like. Okay. So who are we? Well, the conversation today is with myself, Ruth Knight. I have about 25 years experience of working in the sector, and always have involved volunteers in what I've been doing. So my background is community health, homelessness, youth work, education. That's a lot of my background. And I have always involved volunteers in my work because I love them and I know how valuable volunteers are. So I've learned a lot about working with volunteers, recruiting, retaining and supporting volunteers in my experience. But of course, today now I work at the centre, and so I lecture in volunteer management, which also includes volunteer management. So that's one of my jobs. And I also do a lot of research around volunteerism, and I work with organisations who want to research how their own volunteers are motivated or what keeps them retained. So I've been doing some very interesting research on this topic, and so hopefully I've got something to share with you today. And then we've also got Michelle from Volunteering Queensland. And Volunteering Queensland is a state peak body dedicated to advancing volunteering for the economic, social, cultural and environmental well-being of Queensland. Said very nicely. So Michelle, did you just want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. As I just put in the chat, there's a few familiar faces there. So hi to all my new friends and then friends I already have out there. And I do also acknowledge there's a whole bunch of expertise in amongst those people too, as well as yourself, Ruth. So this isn't my podcast. This is a conversation that I'll have some input, but I'm happy to hear from others as well, from the experiences. My background has come right from being involved with volunteering and community engagement, community recreation, right through into the training around that, but it certainly has been embedded in not-for-profits. I was definitely one of those children that was raised with volunteering in my blood, because my parents had it in theirs. So I've lived the experience, and I title myself as a serial episodic volunteer who keeps popping up and volunteering at bits and pieces. And for those that know my poor husband now, he gets dragged along to some of them, but he's starting to balance it and he's dragging me along to a few. So yeah, it's not only something that I work in, it's something that I live in as well. And there's a never-ending wealth of knowledge to learn and changes and updates. So it's great.
Yeah, same for me. I think once you learn yourself the benefits of volunteering, it's really hard to then get that out of your blood because you just love it so much and understand the benefits of it. And I started volunteering way back when I was about 18. Oh, actually before that, I was running a youth group, I think, when I was about 15. And that's when I started volunteering. And then when I was 18, I went overseas and did my first international development work as a volunteer over in India. And I've never forgotten that. So yes, isn't it interesting how volunteering can shape you as you're growing up? Anyway, we've got so much to talk about today. And I just thought to kick off the conversation, it would be really good to do a bit of a reflection, everyone. So I'd like you to put in the chat, if you don't mind, how are your volunteers been feeling over the last few months? I just thought maybe we could just sort of hear from everybody. What are the kind of feelings that people, your volunteers or the people that have been managing volunteers, how have they been feeling over the last few months? Just pop it in the chat and let's see what the different types of emotions that have been going around in our organisations the last few months. Okay, so frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed, from nervous to excited. Yeah, okay. Disappointed, frustrated, at a loss, frustrated.
Oh, wow.
Disconnected. Yeah, that's the time, isn't it? Patient. Well, that's good. That's really good to hear. Only 10% able to return now.
Yeah,
Marvelous.
that's not unusual.
Wow. Yeah, volunteer work has been very frustrated. Yeah, a lot of you have said frustrated. Yeah. 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 So they're probably anticipating this return, aren't they? And wanting to come back. I hope you can all see the chat and you're seeing everybody, what everybody's writing there. Excited. Good. Okay. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think for me then, Michelle, just to kick off this conversation, is really that, you know, there are a lot of high emotions going on in organisations at the moment. I'm just going to go to some of these. These are some of the questions that I thought might, you know, help us in our conversation today. But thank you for sharing that. And I think everybody online today has really just, proven that there's very high emotions. People are, you know, thinking about all of the COVID and the things that have had to change within the organisation over the last few months. It's really affected us emotionally. And of course, as somebody who loves culture, I really think about how that affects our culture and what does that mean in terms of behaviour and how people are engaging. So if you're feeling disconnected, what does that mean? Or if you're feeling frustrated, what happens to your thoughts? You know, what are you thinking and what are you behaving? So Michelle, maybe you could tell us what you've been hearing, because you're working with a lot of different organisations. You know, how are people feeling and, you know, what has changed in the last few months that you've noticed? Maybe both good and bad.
Yeah, so certainly there has been, and I think it's about 70% of organisations have had to stand down or reduce the hours dramatically of their volunteers. So when you consider that the reliance on volunteers for service delivery, this is a real major component of an organisation's operations that's not happening. They've certainly, you know, we've all seen this massive shift to the online virtual world. So having to alter their service delivery has enabled some organisations to maintain some volunteer input. So they've changed, the volunteers aren't doing respite visits and trips, they may actually just be doing those welfare conversations. So the actual roles within the service delivery component the volunteers were part of, in some instances was able to just do a bit of a pivot and continue in some way, shape or form, and it's that 70% that haven't been able to do that we've really seen the change for them and all of those emotions that you mentioned. I suppose we can take it back beyond COVID though. So if you go right back to the droughts and the fires and floods and then we got COVID, what has happened is that this enormous growth and wave of awareness about volunteering has happened across the world. So the importance of volunteering has grown in the community, and that's why you've seen a lot of growth in people interested in volunteering, and then there's not the capacity to volunteer in the ways they need or can or want to. So that, you know, there's some larger dynamics going on than just what's happening in those small in the individual organisations, but the volunteers, certainly what we're seeing is that the involvement with volunteers is shifted to being welfare and a lot more personal. How do we keep them connected with our organisation as opposed to how do we get them delivering a service? And unfortunately we're seeing, and I noticed some people had mentioned it in the chat, that this is a really interesting, an easy way for some organisations to cut budgets or personnel. So if you've got no volunteers, you don't need the coordinator. Well, the coordinator in other instances has had to try and cover the work of the volunteers because we've shown that the sector relies so heavily on a specific demographic and that retiree, that when they became the vulnerable community, you know, it was like, so there's been some stopping and thinking about the volunteer that you're engaging with, and absolutely the importance of keeping the volunteer involvement in an organisation has come to the forefront. So, you know, organisations certainly are seeing that how they're starting to be more aware of what volunteering means to their organisation. And I guess it's about moving away from that thought that volunteering is a program you offer and in your service. It's not a program, it's actually your workforce.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
You're volunteering.
They're not there.
Yeah,
really
it's their involvement.
Realise how important they are.
It's that service delivery. It just happens to be done by a volunteer workforce.
Yes.
So they have to rethink how they're actually involving volunteers and what the capacity is for them to do that. And I guess when you look at organisations that really feel the pinch because they weren't able to do fundraising as their main income, that was mostly done by volunteers. So they've had to come up with creative ways to say, how do we actually maintain some funding to enable us to do some basic service delivery?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really that balancing act, isn't it, between protecting the organisation, because you still want to deliver a service or do your fundraising, whatever it is, using volunteers, but often they can be the most vulnerable population, as you say, if they're the older retirees. We know that we're trying to protect them from COVID as much as possible, so we don't want them to come in. And I think someone earlier was saying, they've lost all their volunteers because they were all from that demographic.
Yeah, most have. And one of the stories I heard was the organisation that relied so heavily on that demographic. When they did come back, they were able to get them back to some limited capacity. Well, then we opened up Queensland to travel and they all jumped in their caravans and buggered off on holidays. And so they lost their workforce again.
Yeah.
So,
of course they can, because they're volunteers. They don't
have
that contract with you like a paid employee. Of course, paid employees can leave, but there's not quite that contract.
It's not quite as easy. Yeah. And I guess the thing is this is where you start to look at the swell of volunteering and the desire to volunteer that's across community. And this is where organisations need to start to stop and go, what's the strategy I can implement that we start to broaden the volunteer base? How do we start to involve volunteers from different demographics? Because we know, like, you take it from the care army right through to all of the pop-up Facebook groups of come and help your community. We know that there is a lot of people across all the demographics that want to help out.
Does everybody know about the care army? If you're not from Queensland, I'm not sure you might, I don't know if you've heard of that. It's something that we did in Queensland over COVID, and it was promoted as a way for anyone in the community to volunteer. And the government, I think, wasn't it, Michelle, the government that actually instigated it, although you, Volunteering Queensland, were running it, sort of thing, managing
we were
it.
We were the back end coordinating, placing volunteers with organisations to assist them to deliver services to vulnerable people. The care army is still technically going because we're not out of this woods. So, but yeah, we based it on our involvement with disaster and recovery and spontaneous volunteering.
So suddenly thousands of people, I mean, literally it was thousands of people said, yes, I want
30,000.
30,000, right. So suddenly 30,000 people that may or may not have been volunteering for other people, but I think a lot of those were people who didn't normally volunteer. They were suddenly saying, I want to do something, I want to help, how can I help? I want to sign up and be part of this care army. So to me, that says that people really do want to volunteer.
I think you take it higher than, you take it broader than that and look at all of the pop-up Facebook groups. Look at the activism in its true nature and within the bounds of law and everything is still people stepping up to do their bit and give their time willingly for the common good, for something they believe in. Informal volunteering like that that's not connected to a formal organisation is enormous.
But those people are also, once they stop or once they're not engaged through the care home, because I think you told me that there wasn't even enough volunteering to give them, so some of them wouldn't have even got the opportunity to do anything, then they're not connected. They're not, you really still want them to feel connected to an organisation, don't you? And so this is for people online here. You know, this is one of the things for your organisation to think about, is how do we make people feel connected with our organisation so that they continue to feel like they want to come and volunteer, even if they have to have a break or a gap, or we have to invite them to do a different type of volunteering role. Yeah. How can we keep them connected with our organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's that thing of saying, how do we connect our broader community to our organisation and what we're about? So they're your unmet volunteers, and then the ones that you do have, how are you balancing of what your needs are and what their needs are, because they'll have expectations and stuff around what connected means to them.
Yes.
And I guess that's what we've seen, is that some people are happy to just have that social connection and being checked in on. Others are absolutely missing the tasks that they were doing. And that was their connectivity, was what their output was. And that's the frustration that they're feeling, is that I'm not doing anything. It's nice to chat to you, but I want to do something.
I think it might be good for me to show a little slide here that I've just actually been doing a little bit of work on understanding the different factors that keep people engaged and keep people retained. So, you know, let's talk to this, Michelle, and see if it aligns with what you've been sort of seeing. But what we've been finding is the research says that volunteers have to be motivated. There must be a reason for them to come and volunteer their time. So it could be a career choice, you know, like it's something to help them with their career, or it could be that they're just isolated and lonely and they want to make some friends. It could be that they're just feeling, you know, they don't feel like they're contributing at all. And I think that was what the care army was a lot about, was people just wanting to feel that they wanted to contribute to an issue. So whatever it is, there must be some sort of motivation for that person. And then they also have to feel competent. So whatever you're giving them, the task that you're giving them, they need to feel that they can do it. Because if they feel like, oh, I can't do that, or I've got no transport, or I can't get there, or I don't know how to speak to people, or I, you know, don't know how to use the computer, then again, that's going to, they're not going to want to be involved with your organisation. The other thing is then that they need to be fulfilled. So it needs to give them that inner sense of satisfaction that they've contributed to your organisation or the community in some sense. And it's really important that they do walk away from every opportunity for volunteering with a sense of fulfilment. The other thing is that they need to be recognised. They need to feel valued. You need to say thank you to your volunteers. And I know it sounds really basic, but so many volunteers don't feel thanked. Now, the interesting thing is, though, that sometimes people feel the word thank you is a little bit empty. So they like other types of saying thank you. And in fact, I've identified, or there's some research out there that's identified, there's 5 ways, key ways that you can appreciate people and how different people feel appreciated. So it's really important that you learn about your volunteers and how they like to feel valued and recognised. And it's not always public, but sometimes people want to be publicly recognised as well. And the other really important thing is they want to feel connected. They want to feel that they're part of a community. So how do you create community within your organisation? Is it on a Facebook group, or is it normally it would be, you know, morning teas or training or something that you're doing to actually make people feel connected with your organisation and their peers, who are often volunteers, but it can be staff as well. So what is it that you're doing? Now, the research shows that if you manage to get all of this right, or at least, you know, done well, you're much more likely to retain your volunteer. And the outcomes of that are really important. Volunteer health and well-being. You are doing an incredible thing for the volunteer themselves. We often think it's about what they're doing, and we think it's about the beneficiary outcomes, and the next box is beneficiary outcomes, but we often forget that first and foremost, you're actually providing that volunteer with an opportunity for health and well-being, because they're feeling good, they're feeling fulfilled, they're feeling connected and less isolated, they're feeling motivated to come and be part of their community. So really important outcome. And then of course all your beneficiary outcomes, so whether they work with young people, palliative care, elderly care, whatever it is that you do, there's obviously beneficiaries of your organisation that are benefiting from volunteerism. And then organisational capacity. So what Michelle has just said is that it's building the capacity of your organisation to do what it needs to do. And once you take them away, you realise what a massive hole and gap, you know, that they fill normally. And then it's building the capacity of the community. So when you get those volunteers, and of course we know that a large percentage of the population volunteers in one way or another, if you took that away, it would be an incredible loss to the economic and social infrastructure of our community. So we must never underestimate the power of volunteerism and the role that you play as an organisation to achieve these outcomes through thinking very carefully about how you work to retain your volunteers. Michelle, am I getting that right?
There's some really good stuff in that. And I guess if you look at it from an organisation, remembering that if you are the volunteer coordinator and you're paid or even unpaid, there is a point where you are responsible to the organisation. So there has to be a balance of the volunteer running after the volunteers' well-being and ensuring that they're happy and connected and fulfilled, and ensuring that there's some outputs for the organisation. So that organisational capacity output and community capacity, you still need to make sure that they're contributing. So definitely, yes, all that stuff. And I suppose when you look at those key factors, it's about getting all of your processes strong and some rigor around them and being really successful. So right from how do they hear about your organisation, what's the word on the street about your org, how do you recruit them, how do you induct them, and what information do you give them, then what are you doing to support them in their roles to ensure that they're confident and competent in doing it, and then they'll stick around. So and the flip side is if they are confident and competent in what they're doing, then they will actually produce the outcomes that your organisation has them involved for.
Yeah.
And so it makes sure that balance is there, and the effort into the volunteers' well-being isn't at the detriment of what they need to be doing. And that's the kind of cruel, hard little bit that's within that of saying, and some of you have heard me say it, that if the balance turns the other way, all of a sudden you're a respite service, because all you're doing is giving them everything they need and the organisation isn't getting anything out of them.
Yes.
And that's sort of that thing of saying, are they right? Are we the right place for them to be volunteering?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you can't just expect that to be so, just naturally. And I think that's why also it's very important to have a good recruitment process.
Yes.
And be very selective in your volunteers. So you should have an application form. They should come to an interview. They should give you references. All of those things that you would do for a normal worker, it's the same for a volunteer, because if you get that match wrong between you and the volunteer, it's not going to turn out nice for either you or the volunteer, you know. It's going to be a bad ending. And
Yeah.
that's not good for anyone, right?
And I guess that's the flip
Can I
side
just stop there for a moment? Michelle, just while you go, Natalia, I am going to ask you to do a job for me, please. James has said, what are the 5 ways of thanking people? While we're still talking, can you quickly look up the 5 ways, the book, you know, by Gary Chapman, the 5 ways of appreciation. Can you get the link and put it in the chat for me to that book? And then everybody can have a look at that book. I know Natalia will do that for me. All right, so sorry, Michelle.
I've lost my train of thought. Let's move on. It's all good.
All right, well, did you want to have a talk to your slide? Because I know that you've got a really great slide, and I think this is helping the conversation, to be honest with you. Really more, again, what's motivating people, because, you know, we have a normal when COVID isn't on, and, you know, we know that there are different ways or there's different reasons why people are motivated to do volunteering. But can you just explain this, which is, again, perhaps helpful to organisations who are recruiting, because as we were just saying, you need to have a really good recruitment process. Don't just presume everybody that knocks on your door is going to be a great volunteer for you. So you must have,
and I guess do
you encourage people to do this as part of their recruitment process?
And I suppose the recruitment process starts right back from the job ad, and it goes right through to the volunteer having the right to have a job description and expectations around that. So if you look at the rights and responsibilities of a volunteer is a really good starting point, and it should be in every induction pack for any volunteer anyway. But certainly making sure that fit is correct, and then continuing to maintain and support the role that you've offered them. But I guess when you're looking right back, when you start to say, where do we have volunteers involved, and what type of volunteer is going to be best suited to this. So what is you're not recruiting the same type of volunteer across the whole org. And this is just a very simple diagram to make you start to think about the different types of motivations that people may come with. We spend a lot of time in the volunteering sector servicing the people-focused social volunteer. And these are the ones that will turn up to your morning teas and your events. So they're very focused about connecting with people, making new friends, meeting new people. They're the ones that will turn up and have a cup of tea and a bicky before the shift, and all that social stuff is there. They like to work in teams. Then you've got a volunteer who has come to you because of your mission. So it's the cause that is driving them and why they're there. So it might not be, it's sort of like, I'm here to make sure that the animals are looked after. I'm here because I believe I want to do something to improve the environment. So they're driven by the mission, and they tend to be able to do whatever's needed, boots and all, I mean, as long as the cause is it's related to the cause and I can see I'm making an impact on that. So that is their motivation, and their reward systems have to be balanced against that, or recognition of that. Then you've got the ones who are there for the task. Now these volunteers, they like to do a particular thing, and it's not necessarily as strong in what the organisation is that they do it in, but this is my specialty, this is what I do well, and I'm here because of this task. So they may be your handymen or your gardeners, or they may be your treasurers. They've got a skill set that's quite defined and transferable across organisations. They've chosen your organisation, but when you start to look at the type of volunteer you're looking for, you need to look for that type of person. You don't want a social person that you have a particular task with deadlines around, because they may be chatting and want to catch up, and you know that they're there for the lighter things, and the tasks aren't driven. Having said that, if you put on a morning tea, don't be upset if the task and mission focused people don't turn up. Yeah. Because they're not there for the social, and that's okay. The mission people, and I've heard organisations that have got this type of volunteer, that get absolutely upset when they see money spent, that they're hard. I'm fundraising to cure cancer and you're spending it on morning teas and birthday cards.
Yeah.
You know, so then all of a sudden you go, okay, they're not here for social, they're here for the mission. So this affects how you advertise your recruitment. Who are you aiming it at? Where's that person that suits this? Right through that, when you support them, and that reward. So the thank yous and the recognition you give to people need to feed the motivation. So anybody got some ideas on how you would reward and recognize somebody who is there for a task or a mission?
Yeah, let's throw it out.
Who's got some ideas? Jonathan, I'm going to say no to you.
Actually, I was thinking, Michelle, I think you mentioned this one last year at the volunteering conference, was a tour for some people.
Tour guides that were all about the mechanics of things. Yep. Yeah. How would you reward them though, is to take them on? So yeah, they were tour guides, and the reward was to actually take them all to somewhere of interest to them and show them around, and they become the tourees. Any other ideas?
I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, my name's Margaret. I'm from the Infants Home in Sydney. What we do is we typically would have a group of corporate volunteers that would come in on a weekly basis, and what we would do for our volunteers at the end of the day is create a little, we'd write a thank you card, handwritten thank you card, and the card, the artwork on the card was actually artwork that was done by our children that come here at the Infants Home. And it's just, every card that was open would be a really, you know, a beautiful reaction and an appreciation.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Perfect. And that's that connection.
To the cause, yeah.
Yep, that's right. So think about acknowledging them in an AGM. So acknowledge them in your report. If you do produce a documentation, having them noted that they were part of that. Or definitely the mission people, if they see that end result, they want to see the statistics. They want to see that testimonial from the client at the end. So it's relating it right back to what they're doing. If they're, if they're your gardener and they come in and do the gardening, they're a very typical solo volunteer that comes in, does their bit and disappears. But what if you had a plaque on a plant, or what if you actually opened a garden in their name? You know, they don't necessarily want the big notoriety. They may actually just be happy to say. One of the big things I've seen for a gardener is to ensure that they always have the tools that they need. And that's the thank you they get. It's like, you know what, you're equipping me to do my job better. So, you know, I feel like you've acknowledged the work I'm doing because you've given me all of the resources I need to do it as best I can. So it's not about the social gatherings to them. The social people are the easy ones. And I guess the thing is you need a balance of these people, because if you have just social volunteers, you might be surprised to see that a lot of work doesn't get done.
Yeah. And I just want to pick up on Jonathan has just put in the chat about keeping in touch with your volunteers. And I think that's very, very pertinent right now, because if a lot of volunteers aren't coming in, you still need to keep in contact with people. And that is that is one of the 5 ways of appreciation, quality time. And so I think that if you're able to touch base with people, and if you've got a lot of volunteers and you as a coordinator can't do that with all of your volunteers, because I know some of you have hundreds of volunteers, if not thousands, then you have to set up a team, you know, like you have mini team leaders. And so you would have groups of 10 where you would set up a sort of buddy system, and you would have a team leader responsible for keeping in touch with everybody within their little group. So break it down, and don't feel that you've got to be the person that's constantly ringing all your volunteers. You know, make sure that someone on behalf of the organisation is keeping in touch with them and saying, we're thinking of you, we're missing you, or how are you going? You know, we're looking forward to getting back, you know, soon. Keeping them up to date with what the organisation is doing, how it's responding to COVID, or, you know, just keeping them informed, I think is incredibly important.
And I guess it's, you know, and a similar thing is the tree. So you might contact 3 people and then they're assigned to contact 2 people, and then you create a tree structure so that those people have that one-on-one, you only have 2 people to contact, and it strengthens it a little more. But also don't be afraid that keeping in mind that when we move into whatever we move into the future, is that connection going to be something that the volunteers are going to expect and desire? It's not going to all of a sudden stop and, oh, look, they don't care about how I'm going and my personal life anymore. It's back to task. Yeah. If they want to keep on elements of that, then maybe consider creating volunteer roles that are focused on the social connectivity. Yeah. Because there are some people that would be the bee's knees, that's their role, is to just go in and help stay connected with volunteers, or create newsletters, you know, send out emails, keep informed, and they can become your reporting back kind of measure as well.
So I want to share something that we do at the centre, because we have a little tradition here of recognition, and I wonder whether Marg or Catherine or anyone else who knows at the centre what we do here, just to share with people. Marg? Are you there? Catherine, do you know what we do? Instead of me talking. I will tell you if they're not.
A frog?
Yes!
Catherine's written in it. They've come in on the chat box, Ruth. So something about a Freddo frog, I'm thinking. Yeah, the Freddo.
Thank you, Tara. Yes, we have a little tradition because, and the reason why I'm saying this is because you do need to keep your thank yous relevant, not like it's no point in giving people something really expensive for, you know, when you just want to say thank you. And so we, it was our centre's director a few years ago started this tradition of giving people Freddo frogs. Yeah. And it's really, really lovely. It's stuck for years. And if you do go to our website, you'll see the Freddo frog story and why we give Freddo frogs. And now that is now a tradition that we have at the centre. And if you receive a Freddo frog, you get a sense of fulfillment, hopefully. I still do, and I work there. And it feels really good to just get this little Freddo frog. And Wendy will often write that handwritten note that will say, just thank you for what you did last week, or thank you, you know. And also we obviously send it to our students and we say, well done on your studies and things like that. And it's just a beautiful little tradition that we have at the centre. And I think that that's something like that everybody can have, that's meaningful to you and has a good, you know, a good story, and everybody knows what it means to get this, you know, accolade of, and it can be very quiet, can be very just in the post, or it can be quite public. Yeah.
And I guess it's that thing of also cultivating a culture where that can be handed sideways around your volunteers, so they start to acknowledge each other, and don't make that dependence that all of the support and everything has to come from up, especially, you know, those that have very large and maybe distributed volunteers groups. How do you cultivate that in their smaller clusters or in sideways around them to ensure that people, I suppose it's also that thing of, if you have got your volunteers in teams, creating an environment where you do get them to stop and recognise each other's motivation. It's the same as you would do in a workplace, is how do you create a culture with them that they understand each other, because then they will understand, well, why didn't you show up for the morning tea? That's like, because I don't do scones. I don't do that.
There are some great surveys out there that you can use, and I'm just working with another organisation that's using, it's called the Volunteering volunteer motivation inventory, something like that, but it's a scale that's been developed so that you can do a little survey with your volunteers. So, you know, if you are really keen about understanding, even at the interview stage, and understanding what is the reason that you would like, because sometimes people don't always really know it, but if they are here to get a resume, you know, something on their resume, or they're here to get some work experience, you know, it's really, really helpful to get that as early as you can. And Jonathan in the chat has actually just said this is a really good time to actually put together your volunteer position descriptions and think about your recruitment and your retention strategies. So whilst you may not be as active or as normal, although some of us are busier than ever, you know, this is a really good time to think through those processes, and to see what's working. And Michelle, I'm very, very keen of conscious of the time here, and I really did want to just move on to another very important question, was around measuring and reporting on volunteerism within your organisation. And so this is maybe a segue to say, well, if you are capturing why people come and volunteer with you and why they leave, okay, because we should be doing exit interviews with people and asking them, why are you not volunteering with us anymore? Because that can tell you a whole heap of information about where you need to improve or what you're doing right or wrong. So getting that exit interview is very, very important. But is it from do you tell people that it is important to actually report on, you know, the numbers?
Absolutely.
Is why they're with you, what they do, you know, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask this question and then I'll answer, because I just give people time in the chat box. I'd like you to write into the chat box what you think the current wage rate used to work out the value of volunteering is. So there's an hourly rate that is used to calculate volunteering if you go down that financial road. I'm just going to say that now to allow you time to put it in the chat box what you think that figure is, and then I'll let you know. So absolutely. And I think the thing is that you need to you absolutely need to be measuring the outputs of volunteers and the impact they're making on the organisation, on your organisation's capacity, as well as your service delivery. And that's the real tough stuff, because that's usually not what your funding is geared towards. It's hard to allocate the time to say, well, where do we put in the qualitative and quantitative stuff around volunteering? If you look at the national standards for volunteering, standard 8 is about continuous improvement and evaluations. So it is recognised nationally that it is one of the 8 areas that you need to ensure that you've got in there. So not looking at just the figure amount, but considering the impact and the outcomes for the volunteers and the organisation, and then flip it and go, what's the difference that the volunteering has made to the individual? Because they are the community. And one way to think of this is consider your volunteers like you do donors, if you have donors.
Yes.
So donors are providing you with money, but these guys are providing you with their time and their efforts and energy and expertise. Do you actually put as much energy into evaluating and maintaining them? And then starting to say, how do we actually measure this, and how do we then make the management acknowledge those other measures? And it's starting to learn to report up to say that the impact that the volunteers are making on our business as usual, as well as the difference they make in our service delivery, it has to be recognised right through. It should be in the leadership reports. It should be in the AGM. Now I'm going to look at the numbers. There's a few of you that are close. Kay Tilk has got it, your 2 cents off. It's $43.02 currently is what we're currently is the recognised rate per hour for a volunteer what they're working. Now, and that's not the be-all and end-all, but quite often that is actually the most reported against measure, is flip their hours into dollars.
So if you actually do that, it makes them become donors so much better. Like it's
more,
so much
even more
obvious that they are donors. And I wonder if in everybody's organisation you call them donors. Do you, not obviously maybe to their faces or whatever, but does your organisation generally consider your volunteers as equally as important as the people who are giving you money?
That's right. And if you start to say, you know, Bruce has mentioned, look at that as a figure per annum, what resources are being put to achieve that? You know, you can't sit there and cut back at one end and say, well, we're going to cut the resources and support for volunteers, but we still want $100,000 worth of their effort out of them.
Yeah, so folks, when we calculate that into what we call a social return on investment, so when we're calculating what those volunteers offer to the community or to your organisation, the outcomes that are achieved, that's when you can go and say, that is why we need a volunteer coordinator. That's why we need money to be able to invest in our retention and recruitment processes. It's a very, very good argument to go to either your own organisation or funders, even philanthropic funders, who are looking for things to fund because of community connectedness, for instance. And I know one organisation that I work with has just received a grant because they were able to say, we use so many volunteers that it's really building the connectedness between them and their community. And they received a large grant to help them manage their volunteers. So if you're able to measure that and prove that what you're doing is very beneficial to the volunteer or to the community, there are grants available and people will support that. And your own organisation should then have more of a reason to fund the volunteer program.
Yeah, and I suppose it's looking at that whole. You have to ensure that you start the habit within your organisation that if they do say what's the figure, then you just push out all that other stuff. And you can't push out that other stuff unless you are doing some of that investigating, asking the volunteers what they've been doing, what's their difference they've made, asking the client group or the end users what differences it made, you know, getting it from all sides. And of course that then, on top of that, then becomes a project in itself of how do you actually roll out the project of evaluating the impact of your volunteers. But then again, you also could look at that's potentially a volunteer position, that somebody is doing that, or you get the volunteers involved in it. Or
well, we're nearly out of time, Michelle, already.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And there was still so much to talk about, but I think that we really need to land it with maybe a couple of key tips. So going forward over the next couple of months, how do we, and if we circle back to the first question that we asked was how people are feeling, and if we know that people are feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, disconnected, all of those things that we don't, or excited, I mean, there's positive things where we keep that happening, but if there's feelings that are happening within our organisations that we know need to address, what are, like maybe Michelle, your 2 tips, but can everybody put in a tip to share with the group?
Yeah.
Can everybody say, what are you doing or what are you going to be doing to address the needs of your organisation and your volunteers over the next couple of months as leaders within this sector? So I'd love to hear everybody's just share a tip or a suggestion with the group. And Michelle, maybe you can just...
I think the big thing...
Final big whammy, you know.
I think my closing... Yeah, I'd close by saying, remember, this isn't just about the volunteer. This is change management. So we're going through change. So if you need to look at something to hold on to, have a look at change management processes, and because that's exactly what you're putting them through, and we're putting them through change upon change upon change without an end in. We don't know how it'll end. So the two biggest things that are important with any change is information and communication. If they are informed and you're communicating with them in a good way regularly and in a supportive way, then that will lift some of that negativity, or it'll give them something else. So certainly take a look at the change management processes of saying that everybody is going to feel differently about change. Some will love it and some will hate it, just as we all would if we asked ourselves. So to keep that in mind, that they're dealing with that. It's not just about their volunteer involvement. Yeah. And certainly use this as a time to look at your structure. If you need to get the mat and shake it, and you've got potential to do that, then do it and use the return as a bit of a clean, this is how we're going to implement some new strategies around our volunteer involvement and make it bigger and better. And speak to each other. Absolutely go to another organisation like you and ask them what they're doing and speak to them, because they're your best support.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks to everybody who's putting some ideas in the chat. And also I wanted to agree that this is a great time to give people IT training. If some of your volunteerism is now going online and you are asking people to stay connected on Zoom and through email and through other sort of internet ways, then this is the perfect time to
absolutely. And there's lots of stuff out there you can take on.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to conclude there.
Yeah.
But I just want to let you know that thank you so much, Michelle, for your time and your wisdom today. I hope everybody gets in touch with Michelle and finds out what Volunteering Queensland can offer them in terms of support and training and resources. I also have a mass of resources that I'm not going to put up now because there's a load of them, but I'll put them in the blog of research that we've done around volunteerism and leadership in this sector. So I'll do that. But there's plenty of other reasons why you should stay in contact with Michelle and myself, because Michelle particularly knows grants and opportunities for you as leaders in this sector. So please stay in touch. We also have a careers night coming up, so we'll let you know about that soon, but it's going to be an online one this time. We normally do it face to face, but it's going to be online this year, and it's talking about careers in the sector. And next month, which is September 24th, we have a great speaker joining us who's going to be talking to us about some research that's been done on people's behaviour during COVID. And it's going to be really important for you as leaders in the sector to know how COVID has really affected people's sense of self-care and what we've been doing. Oh, sorry, I'm about to choke here. So it's going to be a great session anyway, and I'm going to let you know more information about it soon.
Awesome.
So please, if there's any other topics or you felt that there were any questions unanswered today, please feel free to give us an email or, as I said, get in touch with Volunteering Queensland, and I'm sure Michelle will help out. So I hope today was valuable. Thank you so much to everybody sharing their ideas and tips. Have a great day. Love your volunteers, okay? They are very, very great assets to your organisation.
Absolutely.
Go and love them in some shape or form, appropriately, obviously, and look at that book that we put up and find out what the 5 ways of appreciation are and put a strategy in place for that. But again, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for your time. Thanks, everybody, for coming along and joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you next month.
Absolutely. See us. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.